Pregnant wife announces divorce in front of the whole family. Cheating millionaire husband panics. High ceilings and polished marble floors couldn't hide the tension brewing within the Donovan mansion. For years, Clarissa Donovan played the perfect hostess, always gracious, always dutiful, while her husband, Maxwell Max Donovan, radiated charm and power as a self-made millionaire. But on this fateful night, with the entire Donovan clan gathered for a celebratory family dinner, Clarissa's composure will shatter in front of everyone. A single declaration, punctuated by the gasp of guests and the furious drumming of her own heart, will lay bare a devastating betrayal. In a matter of seconds, the public image of a golden couple will implode, and nothing will ever be the same. Maxwell Donovan was the pride of his family. Born to Thomas and Maria Donovan, caring parents who nurtured his early entrepreneurial spirit, Max excelled in school, sports, and social circles. By 25, he had launched his first successful tech consultancy firm. A series of savvy real estate deals and investments followed. Soon, he was not just wealthy, but recognized in high-powered circles across the state. Word of his achievements spread quickly, and the Donovans reveled in the limelight of having a self-made millionaire son. Clarissa Donovan, née Simmons, was an elegant counterbalance to Max's boundless energy. She was the daughter of Dr. Gabriel Simmons, a renowned cardiologist, and Lillian Simmons, an accomplished pianist. Clarissa grew up surrounded by music, academic discussions, and an emphasis on kindness above all else. She had studied business communications, and after graduation, she took a position at a rising tech firm, one of Max's earliest ventures. He noticed her calm intelligence and the way she carried herself with understated confidence. They soon fell into a whirlwind romance. Their wedding was the stuff of glossy magazine spreads, a lavish ceremony at the Redwood Country Club, surrounded by over 500 guests. Pictures showed Clarissa in a gown of delicate lace, radiant with hope, and Max beaming beside her. Their honeymoon in Tahiti became a social media sensation among their well-connected friends. From the outside, they were the ultimate power couple, driven by love and ambition. Yet beneath the veneer of fairy tale romance, cracks began to form. Max's relentless pursuit of business deals meant he was constantly traveling, shuttling between conferences in Berlin, property showings in Miami, and investor summits in San Francisco. Clarissa tried to keep pace, organizing charity fundraisers, hosting formal dinners, and managing a portion of Donovan Enterprises' philanthropic wing. She was praised as the gracious wife who held everything together. In truth, she felt increasingly isolated. Once upon a time, Clarissa and Max had whispered to each other about building a large, close-knit family. But as the months turned into years, and business obligations devoured more of Max's time, those talks dwindled. Sometimes Clarissa would find herself eating alone in their vast dining room, the clink of silverware echoing through an empty house. Worse still were the lingering suspicions, late-night calls from unknown numbers, unexplained absences that Max shrugged off as last-minute deals, and the faint smell of perfume that was not hers on his suit jackets. Clarissa wanted to believe in the man she married, that he was honest and true. She clung to her faith in him, telling herself that no relationship was perfect and that she simply had to be patient. However, intuition can only be suppressed for so long. Deep in her heart, Clarissa knew something was very wrong. She could sense the truth creeping closer, threatening to shatter the illusion of perfection they had so carefully cultivated. Clarissa wasn't the only one who sensed the growing tension. Members of the Donovan family, especially Max's sister, Eleanor, noticed how Clarissa's smiles never quite reached her eyes anymore. Eleanor, a no-nonsense attorney with an instinct for reading people, confided in her fiancé, Mark Wilkerson, about the shift in Clarissa's demeanor. She suspected Max was hiding something, but she had no proof, and, frankly, worried about inserting herself into her brother's private affairs without solid evidence. Meanwhile, Clarissa's parents, Dr. Gabriel and Lillian Simmons, watched from the sidelines with increasing concern. They had always admired Max's drive and generosity. After all, he had set up a scholarship fund in their name, supporting underprivileged youths. Yet, they also saw how often Clarissa visited them alone, seldom mentioning Max unless prodded. Whenever Gabriel attempted to ask about her marriage, she'd deflect the question with a smile and a vague reassurance that everything's fine. Lillian, more intuitive, saw through these placations. She suspected heartbreak, but patiently waited for her daughter to open up. Behind closed doors, Clarissa wrestled with her growing suspicions. She tried to find logical explanations for Max's late-night phone calls. Maybe he was just dealing with overseas partners. She told herself that unexpected trips out of town were a normal part of high-stakes business. But as the signs grew more glaring, the flimsy justifications unraveled. An unknown earring found in Max's car console, receipts for lavish dinners in restaurants. Clarissa had never visited these clues, weighed heavily on her mind. Then came the day Clarissa discovered a glaring text message on Max's phone while it was left charging in their study. The message was from someone named Sabrina Perez, reading, "Can't wait to see you again tonight." Clarissa felt her heart lurch, her breath catching in her throat. When she confronted Max about it, he dismissed it as a colleague joking around. He insisted that Sabrina was a business associate from Miami, and the text meant nothing personal. But the hollow ring of his excuses did little to quell Clarissa's mounting fear. She sought solace in her best friend, Harriet Chang, a PR specialist who lived nearby. Harriet urged her to keep calm, gather evidence, and not jump to conclusions. "Get to the bottom of it before making any rash decisions," Harriet advised, stroking Clarissa's hand sympathetically. "You deserve the truth, whatever it is." Despite Harriet's counsel, Clarissa's anxiety grew unbearable. She felt as though she were living a half-life, constantly questioning her reality, torn between loyalty to the man she loved and the gnawing suspicion that he was betraying her. Little did she know, a family gathering was on the horizon, one that would bring all her fears and the truth into devastating focus. The storm clouds were gathering, and Clarissa's heart told her a reckoning was inevitable. Max's mother, Maria Donovan, was a warm, sociable matriarch who believed in keeping family bonds strong. She planned an elaborate family dinner to celebrate her 60th birthday, inviting everyone from close relatives to dear family friends. The guest list included Clarissa's parents, Dr. Gabriel and Lillian, plus Harriet Chang, who was practically a part of the extended Donovan clan. Also in attendance would be Max's longtime business associates, including Christian Bassett, his real estate partner, and Christian's wife, Sophie. The Donovans loved grand celebrations, live music, gourmet catering, even local press coverage to capture the Power family's event. For Clarissa, the invitation arrived on a day she'd spent rifling through Max's financial statements. She'd found invoices for expensive jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, and rings that she had never seen or received. Her body went cold as dread took root. Either Max was making extravagant purchases for business reasons, or he was showering gifts on someone else. She swallowed her suspicions, forcing herself to remain composed. The upcoming family celebration loomed like a behemoth. She knew it would be insufferable to put on a happy face, but part of her believed that in a gathering of so many, the truth might slip out. Max, oblivious to the depth of Clarissa's distress, or perhaps willfully ignoring it, put on his usual confident air as the big night approached. He arranged the best caterers in the city and even hired a string quartet for ambience. In the Donovan Mansion's great hall, antique chandeliers sparkled overhead, and staff bustled about, setting up tables with fine china and gleaming silverware. Clarissa threw herself into the details as well, assisting Maria in picking floral arrangements, tasting wines, and selecting hors d'oeuvres. On the surface, Clarissa seemed the perfect hostess. Beneath that calm facade, her mind churned with 1,000 unanswered questions. She'd glimpsed Max's phone again, seeing multiple calls and texts to Sabrina Perez. Each time, her heart sank further. Why was he doing this? Was their marriage nothing more than a facade for him? Or was he simply caught in some web he couldn't escape? A few days before the dinner, Clarissa confided her suspicions to Harriet over coffee in a chic cafe downtown. Harriet listened intently, occasionally shaking her head in dismay. "You need conclusive proof," Harriet said, her voice low yet firm. "I know you have your suspicions, the receipts, and those texts. But if you confront him publicly and he manages to spin it, you'll look like the paranoid wife. You need something undeniable." That night, Clarissa could hardly sleep. She pictured the grand dining table, a parade of impeccably dressed guests, and the moment when she would lock eyes with Max and realize she knew the truth. A part of her still hoped she was wrong. Maybe it was all one big misunderstanding, but her gut told her otherwise. Unbeknownst to Clarissa, events were aligning in a way that would force her hand. The family gathering would not pass quietly. It would become a stage upon which every secret, every lie, and every unspoken doubt would come crashing down in front of them all. Sabrina Perez was not just a random fling. She was a striking and ambitious woman with a fiery determination that matched Max Donovan's. Born to a working-class family in Miami, Sabrina had clawed her way up the social ladder. She started as a receptionist at a luxury condo development firm, then quickly learned the ropes of high-end real estate. Possessing charm and formidable negotiation skills, she eventually branched out to form her own small agency. That was how she met Max, a major investor in one of the properties she managed. Their business relationship was straightforward, at first working on deals, showings, and promotional events. But spark by spark, the lines blurred. Sabrina found in Max a mentor, a gatekeeper to a world of limitless opportunity. Max, in turn, was drawn to her ambition and undeniable magnetism. Late-night strategy sessions over dinner evolved into flirtation. Before either of them fully grasped it, they had tumbled into an affair. Sabrina knew Max was married, yet she justified the relationship as part of the cutthroat environment of high-end real estate. She told herself that if Max wasn't happy in his marriage, who was she to stand in the way of his pursuit of something more fulfilling? Over time, however, Sabrina began to suspect that she was just another conquest for him. Max never spoke of leaving Clarissa, never introduced Sabrina to his social circle. He gifted her jewelry, took her to exclusive hotels, and offered sweet words of affection. But Sabrina noticed how carefully he hid her from every public aspect of his life. In the weeks leading up to Maria Donovan's birthday celebration, Sabrina felt Max becoming more distant. He was responding to texts less frequently, citing family obligations. Whenever they met, she sensed a tension in him. One night, in a luxurious penthouse suite overlooking the ocean, she finally confronted Max. "You're pulling away," she accused, crossing her arms. "We used to talk every day, see each other whenever we could. Now you're busy all the time." Max looked away, vaguely ashamed. "There's a big family event coming up," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's stressing me out. My mom's 60th birthday dinner. It's a big deal, and I have to be there." It's not the right time to cause waves. Sabrina pursed her lips. And what happens after this dinner? Are we going to keep doing this dance forever? You either want me in your life, or you don't. I'm tired of being a secret. Max sighed, evading her piercing stare. We'll talk about it after the party, he promised. I just need you to understand that my family is very traditional. Springing this on them, it's complicated. Despite her misgivings, Sabrina allowed herself to believe him, at least for the moment. She told herself that she was on the verge of something bigger, a new life with Max. Little did she know that fate was about to intervene in a way none of them could have predicted, forcing every buried truth out into the open. With the date of Maria Donovan's birthday celebration drawing near, the Donovan estate bustled with controlled chaos. Florists streamed in and out, carrying crates of peonies, hydrangeas, and roses. The catering team delivered supplies from dawn until dusk, and decorators draped the mansion in tasteful arrangements of silver and cream fabrics. A harpist and a string quartet rehearsed quietly in the expansive living room, their melodies drifting through the corridors. Clarissa supervised much of the setup, but her mind was elsewhere. Her eyes were distant, her thoughts laced with anxiety. Occasionally, she would catch a fleeting glimpse of Max rushing through the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Each time, she wondered if he was speaking to Sabrina. She gritted her teeth, reminding herself that she still lacked ironclad proof of the affair. It was maddening knowing in her heart that something was terribly wrong, yet forced to maintain appearances for the sake of family harmony. In the days leading up to the event, Clarissa tried one last time to speak openly with Max. Late in the evening, she found him in his study, hunched over a stack of files. She cleared her throat, drawing his attention. "Max, can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice quivering with suppressed emotion. He looked up, caught off guard by the vulnerability in her tone. "Sure," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Clarissa settled into a chair opposite him, wringing her hands. She felt the words on the tip of her tongue. "I know about Sabrina Perez. I found those texts. I know about the gifts." But fear constricted her throat. She couldn't bring herself to hurl accusations without the final shred of proof Harriet had advised her to secure. Instead, she stammered, Are you happy with me? With us?" A flicker of discomfort crossed Max's face. "Of course, I'm happy," he replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. "We have a good life, Clarissa. I'm just stressed. There's a lot riding on this new business deal. My mother's party is also a big deal. You know how she is about appearances." Clarissa nodded numbly, feeling a surge of anger that he was so adept at deflection. Their entire marriage was apparently about appearances. Realizing she wouldn't get a genuine confession, she forced a smile and stood to leave. "I hope it all goes well," she said, trying not to betray her frustration. Max watched her go, a faint frown creasing his forehead. Deep down, he sensed that he was losing Clarissa in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Yet he also felt trapped by his own choices. The affair with Sabrina, initially thrilling, was now threatening the stability of his marriage, his entire life. As the night of the party drew closer, the tension that simmered between them would only escalate. All the meticulous preparations, all the lavish planning, none of it could prevent the catastrophe that would soon unfold for the Donovans. The night of Maria Donovan's 60th birthday celebration finally arrived. Guests began trickling through the massive double doors of the Donovan mansion at sunset. Limousines pulled up the circular driveway, depositing family members dressed to the nines and business associates eager to rub elbows with one of the state's most prominent families. A sense of grandiosity pervaded the air, each new arrival marveling at the elegant decor and greeting Maria with warm, congratulatory smiles. Clarissa stood near the entrance, welcoming each guest with a practiced cordiality she had honed over the years. Her parents, Dr. Gabriel and Lillian Simmons, arrived early, offering her gentle hugs and searching glances that asked, "Are you all right?" She forced a smile, assuring them she was fine, even as her stomach churned with dread. Shortly thereafter, Max's sister, Eleanor Donovan, swept in wearing a midnight blue gown. Her fiancé, Mark Wilkerson, carried a bouquet of orchids for Maria. "You look beautiful," Eleanor whispered to Clarissa, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "But you also look stressed." "Everything okay? I'm just tired," Clarissa lied softly, willing her eyes not to glisten with tears. "You know these events can be hectic." The parade of arrivals continued. The last to enter was Christian Bassett and his wife, Sophie. Christian embraced Max with a hearty laugh. "Max, you outdid yourself this time," he remarked, eyeing the floral arrangements and the glittering chandeliers. Max merely grinned, though his smile wavered slightly when Christian mentioned, "Heard you've been in Miami quite a bit." "Busy times." Max's eyes flickered toward Clarissa, who was politely chatting with another guest a few feet away. He mumbled something about real estate deals, his discomfort evident. As the evening progressed, the celebration flowed effortlessly. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and canapes. The string quartet played a waltz that had a few couples swaying gently near the grand piano. Maria glowed in a silver gown, graciously accepting birthday toasts and the adoration of her loved ones. Clarissa drifted from group to group, exchanging pleasantries, though her mind was barely present. She replayed every suspicious moment, the texts, the jewelry receipts, the untraceable calls. When Harriet Chang finally arrived, Clarissa breathed a sigh of relief. Harriet squeezed her arm in solidarity, whispering, "Stay strong. If the moment comes, you'll know what to do." And then, the moment that Clarissa had secretly dreaded became reality. As she turned to greet a latecomer by the door, she froze, heart pounding in her chest. Sabrina Perez, radiant in a crimson cocktail dress, stepped into the foyer, her gaze immediately locking with Max's. He paled visibly, nearly dropping his champagne flute. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Clarissa felt the blood drain from her face, while Harriet's eyes widened in shock. Sabrina stood tall, her posture proud, but uncertainty flickered in her expression as she realized she'd walked into a family event of enormous consequence. In that charged moment, it became crystal clear that the secret affair had collided head-on with reality, and that the night's carefully orchestrated celebration was about to transform into a battleground of truth and betrayal. Guests who noticed Sabrina Perez's entrance were initially clueless about the impending drama. Some assumed she was an acquaintance or colleague of Max's. A few recognized her from real estate networking events, though no one openly suspected the depth of her relationship with the evening's co-host. But Clarissa knew in an instant who Sabrina was and why she was here. For a moment, Clarissa's body went rigid, 1,000 thoughts swirling. Had Max invited her? Did she come unannounced? Across the room, Max looked like a cornered animal. His eyes darted between Sabrina, Clarissa, and his mother Maria, who was chatting happily with other guests. The music played on, an incongruous melody underscoring the sudden tension. Sabrina's gaze swept the grand hall, taking in the opulence. Her confidence faltered slightly under the appraising stares. Summoning her composure, she strode forward, stopping just a few feet away from Clarissa. Harriet Chang, sensing the mounting tension, took a subtle step closer to her friend. Clarissa's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Good evening," she said, forcing the most polite tone she could manage. "I don't believe we expected you tonight." Sabrina lifted her chin, pushing aside her nerves. "I didn't realize this was such a private family gathering," she replied, her words carefully measured. "I was under the impression this was a more inclusive celebration. I apologize if I've intruded." Max approached swiftly, placing himself between the two women. "Sabrina, this is my wife, Clarissa," he said, a hint of desperation in his voice. Then, turning to Clarissa, he continued, "She's one of my business associates from Miami. We've been working on some deals together." Clarissa's gaze flickered to him, noting the strain in his features. She forced a tight smile. "Of course. Well, pleased to meet you," she said. Inside, her heart felt like it was about to hammer its way out of her chest. "This woman dares show up at my mother-in-law's birthday party." Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Harriet intervened, offering Sabrina a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "So, Sabrina," Harriet began, "what brings you to the city? Strictly business, or do you have family here as well?" Before Sabrina could answer, Maria Donovan approached, curious about the newcomer. "Max, dear, who is this young lady?" Maria asked graciously. Max swallowed hard. "Mother, this is Sabrina Perez, a contact from my Miami projects. She heard about the party, I suppose, and decided to stop by." Maria gave a polite nod. "Always glad to meet a friend of my son. Enjoy yourself." Clarissa wanted to scream at the absurdity of it all. A friend? A business associate? She clenched her fists, feeling the intensity of the moment spiking her adrenaline. Every nerve in her body itched to confront them both, right then and there. But she knew that a public scene would irreversibly tarnish Maria's big night, and so she swallowed her rage, resolving to keep her composure. For the remainder of the cocktail hour, Clarissa watched warily as Sabrina moved through the crowd, occasionally exchanging tense glances with Max. It was as though every piece of Clarissa's suspicion was falling into place, painting a vivid, damning picture. The real question was, how long could she endure this charade before she finally snapped? Dinner was announced shortly thereafter, and guests took their places at the extravagantly set tables in the mansion's opulent dining room. Each table gleamed with crystal, silverware, and elaborate centerpieces of white roses. Clarissa found herself seated at the head table, next to Max, with Maria Donovan at the center. Sabrina, to Clarissa's silent outrage, ended up at a nearby table within direct line of sight. The first course arrived, an artfully plated lobster bisque. Conversation buzzed around the room, but Clarissa barely touched her food. Every so often, she caught Sabrina gazing at Max, and her husband returning furtive glances filled with tension. Clarissa's temples pounded with every subtle exchange they thought no one else noticed. Harriet, seated across from Clarissa, shot her a sympathetic look. To onlookers, the Donovan family dinner exuded splendor and unity. Toasts were raised to Maria's health and happiness. Classical music drifted in from the quartet in the adjoining salon. Yet under that veneer, the undercurrents of betrayal and suspicion raged. Clarissa found herself torn. Part of her wanted to stand up, shout the truth, and expose Max's lies. Another part hesitated, remembering Harriet's words about getting definitive proof. But how much more proof did she need than the living, breathing woman who dared to attend this family function? Midway through dinner, Clarissa noticed Sabrina quietly slip out of the dining room. Moments later, Max excused himself, claiming a phone call from a business partner. Clarissa's heart clenched. She waited 30 seconds, then put down her napkin and murmured to Maria that she needed to check on something in the kitchen. In reality, she followed the path Max had taken down a corridor leading to a side balcony. What she saw when she reached the balcony door left her breathless with rage. Hidden by the shadows, Max and Sabrina stood intimately close, locked in a low, heated conversation. Clarissa couldn't hear the exact words, but their body language spoke volumes. Sabrina's hand on Max's chest, his arm around her waist, their faces just inches apart. A choking sense of betrayal overtook Clarissa. This was beyond a suspicious text or an unexplained receipt. This was a brazen display of infidelity under the very roof where she slept. For several seconds she remained frozen, her eyes stinging with furious tears. Then she spun on her heel and returned to the dining room, chest heaving, mind spinning with a singular resolution. This has to end tonight. Reclaiming her seat felt like an out-of-body experience. She forced a brittle smile at her father's concern, waved off Harriet's worried questions. No, she would not make a scene yet, not before the entire family. But she knew the moment would come soon, because once the last dessert plate was cleared, she planned to take back her dignity, no matter the cost. And if that meant shattering the Donovan family's carefully polished image in the process, then so be it. After dessert, a decadent tiramisu served with espresso, the guests gradually drifted to the mansion's ornate drawing room. Here, Maria Donovan was expected to make a speech, thanking everyone for attending and toasting to her milestone birthday. The room itself was a study in elegance, velvet drapes, a marble fireplace, and portraits of long-departed ancestors. The string quartet set up in the corner, readying a gentle melody as people mingled. Clarissa stood by the grand piano, Harriet by her side, bracing for the inevitable explosion she felt was coming. She glimpsed Max hovering near the fireplace, anxiously checking his phone, while Sabrina lingered at the edge of the crowd. Dr. Von Wall, Gabriel and Lillian Simmons had retreated to a quieter corner, sipping coffee, clearly sensing their daughter's distress. Eleanor Donovan chatted with other relatives, but periodically shot Max a piercing glare, as if she suspected something was afoot. When Maria signaled for everyone's attention, the chatter died down. The matriarch stood elegantly in front of the assembled guests, smiling warmly. "I want to thank you all for celebrating my 60th birthday with me," she began, voice wavering with emotion. "It means the world that my friends, my family, especially my wonderful son, Max, and his lovely wife, Clarissa, could be here tonight. My husband, Thomas, may he rest in peace, would have been so proud to see us all together." She raised her glass, and the guests followed suit in a toast. Clarissa felt a deep pang of guilt. Maria was a kind woman who had embraced her as a daughter. "But your son is tearing my heart apart," Clarissa thought bitterly, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She clinked glasses mechanically, the champagne turning to ash in her throat. Just as Maria finished her speech, Harriet nudged Clarissa, her eyes filled with compassion. "If you need to do this," Harriet whispered, "then do it. I'm here." Clarissa swallowed hard. The entire room was still buzzing with applause for Maria. Now would be the time, if she wanted her declaration to slice through the ambience like a lightning bolt. With trembling hands, she stepped forward, her voice catching in her throat before she summoned the courage to speak. "Everyone," Clarissa began, her tone surprisingly steady. "May I have your attention for a moment?" The applause died down, and heads turned toward her. Max stiffened visibly, clutching his glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. Sabrina looked on with a worried expression, her posture tense. Maria, puzzled, inclined her head gently to Clarissa, signaling for her to go on. Clarissa forced herself to breathe. Her gaze swept across the crowd, pausing on her parents, Harriet, Eleanor, and finally Max. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, but she spoke clearly, voice echoing in the hush that enveloped the drawing room. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her face set in grim determination, "and I need everyone here, especially the Donovan family, to hear it." In that charged moment, Clarissa felt an odd calm, as though she were standing on the precipice of a long-awaited decision. Everything she had endured, the sleepless nights, the suspicions, the pain, would now burst forth. One way or another, the pretense was about to end. A tense hush settled over the drawing room as Clarissa steadied herself. Every pair of eyes was fixed on her, from family members to close friends to staff discreetly lining the walls. Max shifted uneasily, glancing at Sabrina, who stood near the edge of the gathering with a wary expression. Harriet offered Clarissa a supportive nod, and Dr. Gabriel Simmons gently placed an arm around Lillian, as if sensing a storm was about to erupt. Clarissa's voice rang out, surprisingly firm. "First, I want to say how much I care for this family, my in-laws, my dear mother-in-law Maria, and all of you who have become part of our lives. But I can't continue to pretend everything is fine when it isn't." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Max and I have been married for almost 8 years. In that time, I believed we were building a life founded on trust and love. But recently, I've discovered that my husband hasn't been faithful to me." A collective gasp rippled across the room. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting to Max in disbelief. Eleanor set down her glass a bit too forcefully, her eyes flashing with indignation. Max stepped forward, looking panicked. "Clarissa, wait. Let's talk about this in private," he pleaded, voice taut. Clarissa ignored him. She held out a stack of papers she'd tucked under her arm. "I've gathered evidence, financial statements showing expensive jewelry, hotel receipts, phone records, and I've seen with my own eyes the woman who's been accompanying him on these secret trips. She's here tonight, in fact." All eyes swung to Sabrina, who flushed under the relentless stares. A murmur of shock and condemnation spread through the crowd. Sabrina tried to maintain her composure, but her cheeks burned. She glanced at Max, who seemed paralyzed by indecision. "Clarissa, please." Max's voice trembled. "This isn't the right place or time." Clarissa cut him off, her voice resolute. "The right time to betray me was never, Max. And yet, here we are. I refuse to be humiliated in private while you parade your affair in front of me. I am done." She turned her focus to the gathering, tears glistening but not falling. "I've decided to file for divorce. I'm announcing it here, in front of everyone, so there's no more pretending, no more lies. The man I thought I knew is not the man standing before me." As the guests gasped at Clarissa's words, another voice cut through the murmurs. "I can confirm that," a deep voice called from the back of the room. All heads turned toward a sharply dressed man, stepping forward, Jordan Ellis, a high-profile real estate developer who had worked with Max in Miami. Max's face drained of color. "Jordan, this isn't..." Jordan held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't even try, Max. I've seen you and Sabrina together more times than I can count. Fancy dinners, weekend getaways, luxury hotel suites. You weren't exactly discreet." Clarissa turned to Max with a look of quiet devastation. "So, it was never just business, was it?" Sabrina, standing at the edge of the room, seemed frozen in place. Jordan's words had sealed the truth before she even had a chance to defend herself. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the distant strains of classical music still playing in the adjacent room. Maria stumbled backward, sinking into a nearby armchair, shock etched across her features. "Doctor..." Simmons wrapped an arm around his wife, who was visibly shaken. Harriet discreetly placed a supportive hand on Clarissa's shoulder, a silent testament to her friend's courage. Max tried to approach Clarissa, but she recoiled. Tears now slipped freely down her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. "You've left me no choice," she whispered. "I won't remain in a marriage built on deceit and infidelity." Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished marble floor. "Enough, Max," she snapped. Max turned to his sister, his expression pleading. "Eleanor, stay out of this." "No," she interrupted. "I won't. I've watched you lie to everyone, pretending to be the perfect husband, while Clarissa suffered in silence. "And now that you've been caught, you expect us to just move on?" Max looked around, searching for an ally, but none of his family members met his gaze. Even their mother, Maria, sat in stunned silence. Eleanor's voice turned icy. "You didn't just betray your wife, you betrayed this entire family. And the worst part, you don't even seem sorry." Clarissa exhaled shakily, surprised by Eleanor's support. For the first time that evening, Max seemed to realize how alone he truly was. And with that final statement, Clarissa Donovan, once the gracious, patient wife, stepped away, determined to reclaim her dignity, no matter the cost. The instant Clarissa's announcement concluded, it was as if a dam burst in the Donovan mansion. Voices rose in confusion, anger, and disbelief. Maria Donovan, mortified and heartbroken, clutched her chest. She had anticipated a joyous night, celebrating her birthday, with family and friends. Never could she have imagined her son's marriage imploding before her eyes. Eleanor Donovan stepped in, her legal mind racing. "Clarissa, if there's been wrongdoing, you'll need representation," she began. But Clarissa, tears streaking her cheeks, merely nodded numbly. Eleanor then rounded on Max, her voice quivering with anger. "You knew how important family is to Mom. How could you do this, Max?" Max, visibly shaken, barely mustered a coherent response. I never meant for this to happen," he stammered, darting desperate glances at Clarissa. "I made a mistake. We can work this out." But the raging storm of indignation around him made it difficult to be heard. Close relatives peppered him with questions, demands for explanations he couldn't satisfactorily provide. Sabrina Perez, caught in the crossfire, attempted to slip out of the drawing room unnoticed. But Harriet Chang intercepted her. "Leaving so soon?" Harriet asked pointedly, eyes narrowing. As whispers filled the room, Sabrina's phone vibrated in her clutch. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. "Unknown number. I miss you, baby. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable." Her heart stopped. Last night. She had been with Max just 2 nights ago. She quickly typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "Funny. What? That's what I should be asking you." Sabrina's fingers trembled as realization sank in. Max wasn't just unfaithful to his wife, he was playing her too. She looked up at him, her anger boiling over. "You son of a bitch," she whispered. Clarissa caught the exchange and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong, Sabrina?" For the first time that night, Sabrina had nothing to say. Sabrina flinched under Harriet's gaze. I didn't realize the severity of this situation," Sabrina muttered. "I'll go." Harriet let her pass, but not without a look that clearly conveyed her contempt. Meanwhile, Dr. Gabriel Simmons approached his daughter, wrapping her in a protective hug. Clarissa sobbed against her father's shoulder, her adrenaline-fueled composure finally breaking. Lillian Simmons rubbed her daughter's back, whispering reassurance. Harriet hovered close by, offering tissues and moral support. Maria Donovan struggled to regain her composure enough to intervene. "Please, everyone," she said, her voice cracking. "This is a private matter. Let's not turn it into a spectacle." But it was too late. The spectacle had already begun. Some guests excused themselves hurriedly, eager to escape the uproar. Others lingered in shock, unsure how to react or whether their presence was still welcome. Amid the chaos, Max attempted to approach Clarissa again. This time, Dr. Simmons stepped between them. "Now is not the moment," he warned, voice stern, eyes cold. "My daughter has made her position clear." "Clarissa, please," Max implored, trying to sidestep her father. His face was a portrait of panic. "We can go somewhere private and talk. I can explain." Clarissa stood resolute, her tears subsiding into weary acceptance. "There's nothing to explain," she replied in a trembling voice. "You've shown me who you are, and I believe you." She turned away, seeking solace in Harriet and her mother's presence. In the corner of the room, Sabrina was already gone, leaving only a hushed trail of scandalized whispers in her wake. For Maria, the night was an absolute nightmare, her birthday overshadowed by betrayal. And for Clarissa, it was the first step toward reclaiming her sense of self, even if that step came wrapped in heartbreak and public humiliation. In the days following the catastrophic birthday celebration, the Donovan mansion felt like a mausoleum. The once gleaming corridors were hushed, the staff tiptoeing around a family in ruins. Maria Donovan, shaken to the core, had sequestered herself in her private suite. She refused visitors except for a small circle of confidants, nursing a shattered heart that grieved not only her ruined birthday, but also the public dismantling of her son's marriage. Max withdrew into his study, making frantic calls to Clarissa's phone calls that went straight to voicemail. He left pleading messages, alternating between apologies and declarations of love, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. But Clarissa had moved out, seeking refuge with her parents. She needed distance from a household that now symbolized betrayal and broken dreams. Eleanor took charge of damage control. She advised her mother to lay low until the media storm passed. While the event was meant to be private, enough guests from high society had witnessed the drama that rumors spread like wildfire. The Donovans' closest circles buzzed with speculation. Some criticized Clarissa's timing, while others lauded her courage for standing up for herself. The Donovan brand, once untarnished, now stood on precarious ground. As for Sabrina Perez, she received a barrage of calls from tabloids and gossip bloggers hungry for a headline. Feeling cornered, she issued a single statement through a hired PR rep, claiming she had no intention of disrupting any marriage and was misled about the nature of the relationship. She quickly returned to Miami, hoping that physical distance would offer her some reprieve. But her real estate connections took a hit. No one wanted to risk associating with the woman who'd become the poster child for an affair that rocked a prominent family. Clarissa, meanwhile, found solace in her childhood bedroom, where memories of simpler times flooded back. Dr. Gabriel and Lillian enveloped her in unconditional love, providing the emotional sanctuary she desperately needed. Harriet visited often, bearing food, compassion, and gentle encouragement. "You've done the hardest part," Harriet reminded Clarissa. "You confronted him. You can move forward now on your terms." At her parents' urging, Clarissa reached out to a highly regarded divorce lawyer, Susan Delgado. In their initial consultation, Susan commended Clarissa for her bravery and laid out the legal steps to finalize the separation. "You have options," Susan explained. "We can pursue a fault-based divorce if you want to establish infidelity on the record, or keep it no fault to expedite proceedings. Your evidence is strong. The question is how public you want this fight to be." Clarissa considered her options, torn between anger and the desire to move on. She envisioned a future free from the cycle of suspicion and heartbreak. Yet the sting of betrayal lingered, and some part of her wanted Max to face the full weight of the consequences. In quiet moments, she remembered the early days of their love, how full of hope they had been, and grieved what could have been. No matter what she decided legally, Clarissa vowed to preserve her dignity and well-being above all else. The illusions had been shattered. Now, as the dust settled, she began the difficult process of learning to stand tall amid the rubble of broken vows. Weeks passed, and life began to reorganize itself around the aftermath of Clarissa's dramatic announcement. Though the sensational buzz around the Donovan scandal gradually subsided, the key players were left to navigate a changed reality. Clarissa proceeded with her divorce filings, opting for a straightforward no-fault route, but clearly citing irreconcilable differences due to infidelity. She wanted to avoid a prolonged public battle that could drain her emotionally. Still, she made sure to protect herself financially, with Susan Delgado skillfully negotiating fair terms for spousal support and asset division. Clarissa had contributed to the Donovan philanthropic wing and supported Max's businesses in numerous ways. She had no intention of being left empty-handed. Max, for his part, tried to make amends. He sent handwritten letters to Clarissa, roses that arrived daily at her parents' house, and even tried to ambush her in person at Harriet's office. Clarissa refused to see him. Each gesture felt like too little, too late a bandage on a wound that ran too deep. She recognized his remorse, but saw it as a consequence of being caught, rather than a genuine act of contrition. The illusions were gone. She saw him for who he was. During this time, Clarissa leaned heavily on Harriet, who became her sounding board, cheerleader, and strategist. They discussed Clarissa's future, perhaps returning to her own career, maybe even launching a consultancy of her own. Freed from the constant pressure to uphold the Donovan name, Clarissa felt flickers of excitement about her newfound independence. She had visions of traveling, of living life without needing permission or approval from anyone. At the Donovan mansion, Maria slowly recovered from the shock. She reached out to Clarissa by phone, apologizing tearfully for Max's actions and lamenting that her birthday celebration ended in disaster. Clarissa, still fond of Maria, spoke with compassion but kept emotional distance. As much as she cared for her mother-in-law, she needed to focus on her own healing. Sabrina Perez remained in Miami, her professional reputation scorched. Rumors circulated that her real estate deals were falling through. Despite her initial bravado, she found herself increasingly isolated. Calls to Max went unanswered. He, too, bore resentment toward her for appearing at his mother's party and accelerating the downfall of his marriage. Their fling ended not with fireworks, but with a slow, bitter fade into regret. With the legal process moving forward smoothly, Clarissa faced the final settlement signing with a newfound sense of peace. Dr. Simmons and Harriet accompanied her to Susan Delgado's office, where she affixed her signature to the divorce documents. That's it, she thought, simultaneously relieved and nostalgic for the young bride she once was, filled with hope and belief in forever. In the crisp morning light that followed, Clarissa stepped out onto the steps of the law firm and inhaled deeply. The sun's rays felt warm on her face, illuminating a path forward. No longer shackled by deception, she could begin again on her own terms. And though the heartbreak was real, so too was the promise of a future unburdened by lies, a future in which Clarissa Donovan, newly unbound, would rediscover her strength, her passion, and, one day, perhaps, her capacity for love once more. Sometimes the most dazzling lives hide the most devastating secrets. Clarissa's choice to announce her divorce in front of the entire Donovan family was more than a moment of heartbreak. It was a declaration of self-worth and an end to living under a shroud of deceit. Max, once confident in his ability to juggle both his marriage and an affair, discovered too late that betrayal carries a steep price. In the aftermath, every character faced a reckoning that forced them to reevaluate not just their relationships, but their own identities.
They say money can buy anything except anonymity from the internet. One crisp summer morning, billionaire industrialist David Harrington thought he'd scored the perfect getaway with a bewitching companion half his age. Sunlit waves shimmered behind them in an Instagram post he never dreamed would shatter his life. Within hours, a fiery storm of comments erupted, accusing the mysterious woman of being someone far more dangerous than she appeared. the rumors spiraled into a full-blown exposé that threatened not just David's crumbling marriage, but also his image and legacy. In a single click, the world learned that secrets, no matter how well funded, rarely remain buried. David Harrington had always been a man who commanded attention the instant he walked into a room. At 6 feet 2 inches, with tailored suits that seemed to drape his athletic frame flawlessly, he radiated a polished self-assurance cultivated over decades of hard work and strategic gambles. Born in Chicago to a middle-class family, David displayed an early flair for numbers and negotiation. By the time he was in college, he'd already built 2 small businesses, one reselling refurbished laptops out of his dorm, and another importing artisanal leather wallets from Italy. He was a hustler in the best sense of the word, unrelenting in his pursuit of prosperity. When he turned 25, David took his biggest risk yet. He convinced an angel investor named Richard Carmichael, a man revered for his savvy in emerging markets, to pour $500,000 into a software automation startup David co-founded. It was an audacious move, especially in a market saturated with bigger, more established players. But David's persuasion worked. Within 18 months, the startup was acquired by a larger tech conglomerate, netting David his first major fortune. It was the start of an illustrious career that would see him founding or funding a series of successful ventures into technology, real estate, and even renewable energy. By his mid-30s, David Harrington was wealthy beyond imagination, yet his ambition burned brighter. He was rarely satisfied. Gone were the days of renting modest apartments and living on fast food. He now presided over a sprawling empire, complete with offices in New York, London, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. He jetted around the globe for business deals, indulging in the high-life trappings, private yachts membership at exclusive clubs, and a mansion perched atop the Hollywood Hills with a ski-line view that glittered like diamonds at night. But hidden beneath the aura of success was a restless void. He was married, yes, to the beautiful and accomplished Sarah Whitmore. They met at a charity event in Los Angeles, bonding over a shared passion for philanthropy. Sarah, an Ivy League-educated lawyer turned environmental activist, had grown up in a similarly middle-class background. She understood David's drive and matched him in intellect. For a while they seemed the ultimate power couple, publicly philanthropic, privately fierce in their love and ambitions. However, time and relentless pursuit of more money placed stress cracks in their marriage. David's constant travel, late-night negotiations, and if rumors were to be believed, unstoppable appetite for new experiences, all weighed heavily on Sarah. As David's orbit expanded, she found herself increasingly sidelined, overshadowed by the gravitational pull of his ambitions. Even the philanthropic causes they once championed together were neglected. David wrote the checks, but rarely bothered to attend the galas or volunteer events anymore. By the time he was in his early 40s, the heart of their relationship had eroded, replaced by polite tolerance and carefully orchestrated public appearances. That was the environment in which David would eventually make a series of decisions, culminating in the scandal that would rock his world. Fueled by ego and weary of the stale comfort his marriage had devolved into, he sought excitement elsewhere. He believed he was untouchable, convinced his well-oiled team of advisors and the iron curtain of wealth could conceal any indiscretions. But David Harrington was about to learn one of life's harshest truths in the digital era. Every secret has a lifespan. All it takes is a single post for an empire's pristine facade to come crashing down. Sarah Whitmore Harrington was no stranger to adversity. Raised by a single mother in a modest Chicago neighborhood, she thrived academically, eventually securing a full scholarship to Columbia University. While her classmates carried designer purses and took spring breaks in Europe, Sarah juggled part-time jobs at coffee shops and university libraries. She took pride in her self-reliance, never shying away from hard work and rigorous study. By her mid-20s, Sarah was practicing corporate law at a prestigious Manhattan firm. She was brilliant, resilient, and notably empathetic. Those qualities caught the attention of an internal pro bono committee, which led her to champion several environmental cases against big corporations. Her compassion for the underdog and her deep sense of justice made her a formidable foe in legal negotiations. She even won a high-profile lawsuit that forced a major chemical company to pay millions in damages to a marginalized community. The victory made headlines, and from that moment, Sarah became recognized not just as a skilled lawyer, but as a warrior for ethical responsibility. That was how she met David at a black tie fundraiser in Los Angeles, where he presented a sizable check to the environmental organization she represented. The sparks flew instantly. In him, she saw a titan with an innate gift for making money, and an equally fervent philanthropic side, an individual who could potentially reshape industries for the better. In her, he saw a steadfast spirit, beautiful both inside and out, and a partner whose intellect could match his. Their courtship was whirlwind. They dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, attended exclusive events, and traveled abroad to meet potential charity partners in places like Nairobi and Mumbai. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish beach ceremony in Maui, complete with dignitaries, celebrities, and the who's who of venture capital in attendance. However, the transition from newlyweds to a stable marriage was rocky. David's businesses, spread across multiple sectors, demanded constant attention and travel. Meanwhile, Sarah transitioned from corporate law to running her own not-for-profit legal consultancy for environmental issues, an endeavor that required significant energy and focus. They saw each other less and less. The times they did manage to reconnect were overshadowed by David's phone calls, emails, and text notifications. Despite the cracks in their relationship, Sarah believed she still knew David better than anyone else. She sensed when he was exhausted, recognized when his bravado was merely a cover for deeper anxieties. She also recognized as his success soared to new heights that he was falling into certain patterns, seeking novelty, losing interest in things that once mattered, constantly pushing boundaries. But she never quite dared to voice her growing suspicions. She wanted to preserve their public image, and more critically, she didn't want to face the reality that her husband might be cheating. Then the subtle shifts started. David became secretive about his phone, quickly changing screens when she walked by. He started going on business trips to places that made no sense, or at times that were uncharacteristic for the industries he worked in. Once Sarah found a diamond bracelet in his study desk, one that was clearly not for her, as she had never once expressed interest in that style, nor had he gifted her something similar in years. She brushed it off, attributing it to a possible gift for a female investor or sponsor. But deep down, she suspected. Sarah thought about confronting him multiple times, yet her pride held her back. In her mind, relationships were built on honesty and trust, but confronting David without proof felt like a betrayal of her self-respect. She wanted certainty. She needed to be sure. In the quiet corners of her soul, she wondered if it might be easier to look away, to focus on her philanthropic work, and to let David chase his illusions. After all, they maintained a semblance of stability. They weren't short on money. Her beloved mother was comfortable living in a gorgeous townhouse that Sarah and David financed. On the surface, her life seemed perfect. But as the months rolled on, Sarah felt a gathering storm, an anxiety that gnawed at her. Something in her marriage in David was shifting. For all her accomplishments, for all her unwavering character, she was powerless to stop whatever was happening. A sense of impending disaster loomed. She could almost hear the faint thunderclap on the horizon. She just didn't know how or when it would strike, only that it was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. David Harrington first laid eyes on Layla St. James at a private art exhibit in Soho. The event was one of those exclusive gatherings of the ultra-wealthy and avant-garde, a place to see and be seen. She stood in front of a painting, a swirl of neon colors, something abstract and disorienting, and seemed lost in thought. She wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress, her tawny hair falling in loose waves down her back. David was immediately intrigued by her aura of quiet confidence. He approached her fully expecting that easy spark he often found in conversations. Layla, however, surprised him. She greeted him with polite warmth, but spoke with a self-assuredness and intellectual depth that caught him off guard. She was not overly impressed by his status or money. At least she didn't show it in the usual fawning way. Instead, she asked him questions about his philanthropic endeavors, referencing a literacy program in Southeast Asia that David's foundation had once funded. Few people outside his close circle even knew about that. It was an obscure project, overshadowed by his more flashy contributions. Fascinated by her knowledge, he pressed further. Layla revealed she was an art historian by training, had worked in Europe's auction circuit, and recently moved to New York to pursue her own gallery aspirations. She claimed she had grown tired of the pretentiousness in traditional art circles and wanted to start a space that embraced both established and emerging artists. Over a cocktail in the exhibit's VIP lounge, Layla recounted travel stories from her time in Paris, how she'd negotiated million-dollar deals for rare impressionist works. Her voice dripped with a delicate, almost musical accent. David couldn't quite place a mix, she said, from traveling around the world. In the weeks that followed, they exchanged numbers. David found himself texting Layla at odd hours, discussing art-world politics and eventually drifting into flirtation. Layla reciprocated, sprinkling their conversations with subtle compliments and innuendo that kept David on his toes. It felt like a dance one that David had not experienced in a long time. Sarah had once been his intellectual equal, but now their discussions were overshadowed by property deals, lawsuits, and superficial gatherings. Layla offered something new, something fresh. Their first real date came under the guise of a business meeting at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Midtown. David told himself he was merely exploring philanthropic collaboration, maybe funding an art initiative Layla had proposed. But by dessert, they were lost in each other's eyes. A wave of guilt threatened to crash over David, but he quelled it with a glass of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, rationalizing that he deserved happiness. Life was too short, and he had worked too hard. If he couldn't indulge once in a while, what was the point of all this success? Days turned into weeks, and he found every excuse to see Layla. A hotel suite at the Pierre, a weekend in the Hamptons. David claimed he had an urgent real estate matter to attend to. Layla was always there, radiant, engaging, confident in her allure. But there was something else about her, a certain mystery that David couldn't pinpoint. She rarely spoke about her family or past relationships. She was cagey whenever he asked about the specifics of her work in Europe. His curiosity was piqued, but the thrill of their clandestine encounters overshadowed any red flags. In private moments, Layla would talk about the future, teasing a world where they might be more public in their romance. David smiled, uncertain if he could ever cross that line. He was still tethered by a marriage that he had not fully admitted was over. Yet Layla's world was intoxicating and like a moth drawn to flame. He ignored the risk. The more David's desire grew, the more brazen he became about their affair. Eventually, a reckless idea took shape in his mind. He had a beachside villa in Belize that was rarely used. Perhaps a little tropical escape was just what they needed. Sun, sand, and secrecy far from prying eyes. Layla loved the idea, squealing with excitement at the notion of turquoise waters and private cabanas. They decided on a date, making hush-hush travel plans through David's private jet. In David's mind, this was a contained fantasy, a secret paradise sealed away from the rest of his life. No one would ever know. They would be safe to indulge, if only for a few days. He should have remembered that secrets don't stay buried forever. And with social media's insatiable appetite for drama, a single misstep could set off a chain reaction he'd never see coming. The villa in Belize was a pristine haven surrounded by palm trees, with a private stretch of powdery white sand extending into azure waters. It was the kind of place people only see in glossy travel magazines, one David rarely got to enjoy, thanks to his busy schedule. Layla's eyes sparkled when they arrived. She ran to the ocean's edge, letting the warm waves lap at her feet. David watched her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Somewhere in the recesses of his conscience, a small voice asked, "Is this worth it?" He silenced it, enticed by the vision of Layla on the beach. Each morning they lounged under canopied daybeds, sipping tropical cocktails and listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. David felt more alive than he had in years. He indulged in Layla's laughter, her spontaneous dances in the sand, the ways she made him forget about corporate boardrooms and stifling responsibilities. This was freedom, no obligations, no routine, just the two of them enjoying life's simple pleasures. On the second day, after a lazy breakfast of fresh mangoes and coffee, Layla teased David with a challenge. "Let's take a picture, something special to remember this trip by." David hesitated. He had always maintained a strict no social media posts policy when it came to his private affairs. But the sunlight was dancing off the ocean, and Layla looked radiant in her turquoise bikini. She draped herself across a beach lounger, beckoning him closer. David relented, pulling out his phone. He snapped a few pictures of them together. Layla's head on his chest, the glimmering ocean behind them. Laughing, they flipped through the shots, choosing their favorites. Layla posted a couple of photos on her own discreet account set to private. She had only a handful of followers, mostly art world acquaintances, she said. David shrugged, telling himself that a handful of people with no ties to his life wouldn't make a difference. Still, he felt a pang of anxiety at the possibility of any slip. Emboldened by the day's carefree vibe, David grew reckless. Late that evening, after a lavish dinner prepared by the villa's private chef, Layla pressed herself against him and giggled. "Let's show off just a bit. Let's make them jealous." She grabbed his phone and teased him with an Instagram story post. "Just a quick shot of the sunset," she said, with a silhouette of them toasting wine glasses. She promised it wouldn't give away too much. "No faces, no location tags," she whispered. Caught up in the evening's romantic intoxication, David acquiesced. He posted it. The immediate response from his followers was mild. People admired the sunset, the luxurious atmosphere. But within minutes, eagle-eyed fans began to notice small details, the shape of a woman's figure in the reflection of the glass door, the second wine glass in David's hand. A few commented, "Enjoying a romantic getaway." David, others posted heart emojis and asked, "Where's Sarah?" That was the first red flag. David ignored it, telling himself it was harmless speculation. The next morning, in a haze of euphoria, David made a grave mistake. While Layla was frolicking in the waves, he snapped a candid shot of her, capturing her face in profile, then posted it to his main feed with a cryptic caption, "A moment of peace in paradise." He truly believed it was ambiguous enough that no one would identify her. He never tagged her account, never mentioned her name. But the internet has a way of connecting the dots. Within minutes, the post garnered thousands of likes. Then came the comments, some supportive, many curious, a few, laced with suspicion. A handful of David's close friends texted him directly. "Who is she?" Some used winking emojis, half joking. Others were more direct, worried that this could blow back on him if Sarah saw it. Unperturbed, David turned off his phone notifications, wanting to stay in their bubble of paradise a little while longer. It was on the final day of their trip that reality began to intrude. Unbeknownst to David, a tabloid blogger had recognized Layla's face from a rumor that had circulated in certain high society circles, an art dealer with a dubious past, rumored to seduce wealthy clients, rumored to have left Europe under a cloud of scandal. The blogger had ties to gossip circles across the globe and had access to hush-hush sources in the European art scene. By the time David and Layla boarded his private jet for the return flight to New York, the blogger was already working on an exposé cross-referencing images and combing through digital footprints. The seeds of disaster were planted, and neither David nor Layla had any clue that a social media storm was brewing. They touched down in New York that evening, stepping back into a world that would soon turn on them with alarming speed. For David, the beach vacation was a blissful memory. For the internet, it became the catalyst for a scandal that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his mistress, his marriage, and even himself. When David checked his phone after landing, he noticed a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts, primarily from his closest business associates and his public relations officer, Jacqueline Nguyen. His heart pounded as he glanced at the notifications. Typically, such a flurry of calls indicated a major development, a collapsed deal, maybe a crisis in one of his overseas offices. But as he skimmed through them, he realized the panic was personal, not professional. "David, call me ASAP." One text from Jacqueline read, "We have a problem on Instagram." Confused and apprehensive, he dialed Jacqueline's number. She picked up immediately, her voice strained. "David, you need to delete that post right now," she blurted before he could speak. "Calm down, Jackie." He attempted trying to maintain composure. "What's going on?" She launched into a rapid-fire explanation. "Your post with that woman on the beach." Someone recognized her. Comments are exploding. There's a rumor swirling that she's a con artist who allegedly scammed an art collector in Paris. People are sharing screenshots, old articles, everything. It's going viral. They're calling her the art world grifter. This is beyond just an affair rumor. This could turn into a full-blown scandal. David's head spun. He had braced himself for gossip about a potential mistress, but allegations of criminal activity took the situation to an entirely different level. He ended the call immediately, opened Instagram, and gaped at the flood of comments. Many asked, "Is that Layla St. James?" Others claimed she was wanted for questioning in Europe. Some linked to half-baked investigative pieces from obscure blogs. And then there were the moral judgments, David Harrington. How could you cheat on your wife with a criminal respect lost? Hypocrite. A real philanthropist wouldn't be with a con artist. Layla, who was seated beside him in his chauffeured car, scrolled through her own phone. He could see the color drain from her face. "David, we need to talk," she whispered, voice shaky. Not willing to address the situation in the car, he texted his driver to head to one of his discreet penthouse properties in Manhattan. He couldn't go home to his mansion. Sarah was likely there, and a confrontation now would be disastrous. Layla's expression was that of panic fused with indignation. "I don't understand why they're saying these things," she kept muttering. "I'm not a criminal." She tried to show him what she claimed were legitimate references from her past employers, though David barely glanced at them. Once they arrived at the penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Layla collapsed onto a plush sofa. David paced phone in hand, reading through messages from colleagues, PR consultants, and even lawyers. His empire was built on a carefully curated image of competence and ethics. Any hint of scandal could harm investor confidence. And the fact that Sarah, widely respected in legal and philanthropic circles, might soon find out, was another ticking bomb. "I need you to tell me everything," David demanded, voice taut with urgency. "Why are people calling you a grifter? Were you accused of something in Europe? Tell me now, Layla." She exhaled, trembling. "I never scammed anyone. I was involved with a wealthy French collector. Yes, but I left because he was controlling and abusive. He spread rumors about me to cover his tracks. I never faced any charges. None of it is true." David studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. He had believed her wholeheartedly until this moment, but now his instincts sounded alarms. Something in her eyes. Was it fear, or was it guilt? The swirling chaos of the moment made it hard to read. A sense of betrayal and dread took hold of him. He realized that even if Layla was innocent, the public didn't care. Gossip and scandal had already latched onto them. The internet feeds on controversy, and they had served it up on a silver platter. The damage might already be done. Over the next few hours, David's crisis management team mobilized. He engaged his top-notch legal counsel, pressing them to craft a statement denying any criminal association. Jacqueline orchestrated a digital damage control strategy, locking down comments, removing the offending post, and issuing official disclaimers that any claims about Layla's criminal background were unsubstantiated rumors. But the internet had already taken screenshots. The post lived on in countless retweets and reshares. Worse still, the mainstream media was picking it up now. A celebrity gossip show ran a segment featuring the blurred-out images of David and Layla on the beach with a dramatic voiceover billionaire, David Harrington's rumored mistress, international con artist, or misunderstood muse. Speculative headlines mushroomed across tabloids, often accompanied by pictures of Sarah, his wronged wife looking stoic and poised at past charity events. On top of everything, phone calls from Sarah began lighting up David's screen. He couldn't bring himself to answer. His mind whirled in panic, trying to figure out how to spin this. He composed text after text to Sarah, erasing them before sending any. There was no easy way to explain. Perhaps the best he could do was beg for her forgiveness and attempt some sort of damage limitation. David, Layla said softly, breaking the tense silence. "I need you to believe me. I'm not who they say I am." He looked at her, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We'll figure this out," he managed, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. But the question that truly haunted him was, had he been duped? And if so, was it just by a cunning seductress, or also by his own naive desire for excitement and novelty? The answer wouldn't remain hidden for long. The internet had taken hold of this scandal, and soon even darker revelations would surface, forcing David to confront secrets far more devastating than an affair. While David and Layla tried to contain the inferno in Manhattan, Sarah Harrington was at home, feeling as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. Initially, she had ignored the handful of texts from friends, hinting at David's suspicious Instagram post. She was used to rumors. But then her best friend, Monica Alvarez, sent a message that rattled her. "Please check the tabloids." "I'm so sorry, Sarah." With shaky hands, Sarah clicked a link Monica had forwarded. She saw David's Instagram post, the silhouette of a woman on a beach, and the avalanche of salacious comments and allegations. Her first reaction was numbness, an eerie calm that spread through her limbs. She had suspected David might be unfaithful, but seeing it unfold publicly was a different kind of pain. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. It was her mother, distressed and confused about the swirling rumors. Embarrassment flooded Sarah, a hot flush crawling up her cheeks. She assured her mother she was fine, even though her heart felt as if it were cracking in half. She forced herself to remain steady, telling her mother not to believe everything she read online. But the numbness soon gave way to anger, then heartbreak, then an odd sense of relief. At least now the rumors were in the open. No more doubts, no more illusions. She spent the next few hours pacing the living room, rereading old messages from David, analyzing their marriage from every angle. She felt a mixture of betrayal and odd detachment, as though she were hovering above herself, watching it all unfold from a distance. A short while later, David's chauffeur arrived at the mansion, dropping off a large black envelope. Sarah took it, opened it, and found legal documents inside, some half-baked statements from David's attorneys, disclaimers about the alleged mistress's background, and an apologetic note that ended with, "Please do not speak to the press. I will explain everything." There was no real apology, no admission of guilt, just corporate-sounding instructions. It was like receiving a memo from a CEO to a subordinate rather than a heartfelt message from a husband to his wife. Furious, she called David multiple times, but each attempt went to voicemail. She left a single message. "You owe me an explanation. David, I'm not some PR problem to be handled." Then she hung up, refusing to try again. That evening, as she attempted to navigate the swirling confusion, she received another unexpected visitor. Michael Whitmore, her cousin and fellow attorney, who also worked for a prestigious Los Angeles firm. Michael was in New York on business and had seen the online furore. He arrived unannounced, a supportive presence Sarah desperately needed. They sat in the living room, the mansion feeling too large, too grand for the gloom enveloping it. Sarah poured them both glasses of wine, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She recounted the situation, her suspicions, the damning Instagram post, the rumors about the mistress's criminal past. She felt exposed, humiliated. Michael listened patiently, asking pointed questions. "So this woman Layla might be a con artist," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do we know if it's true?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know anything anymore. I thought I knew David, but now I'm not so sure." Michael offered a thoughtful nod. "Look, Sarah, I can help you. Legally. We can figure out your options, whether it's a separation, a divorce, or simply negotiations for your protection. You shouldn't trust his attorneys. They'll protect him first." Sarah sighed, leaning back into the sofa's cushions. "I appreciate that, but I need time to think. My marriage is on the line, and if this woman really is dangerous, I don't want to rush into any decisions I'll regret." Michael placed his hand over hers. "I understand. But be cautious. Men like David with power and money can become unpredictable under pressure." Do what you must to protect yourself emotionally, legally, financially. That night, Sarah tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her images of David and Layla on a beach swirling tabloids and faceless gossipers pointing fingers at her. The next morning, she decided she wouldn't be silent. If David wouldn't provide clarity, she would find it on her own. She scheduled a meeting with her own legal advisors, ignoring the suggestion in David's letter to remain quiet. She reached out to her charitable partners, confirming that she would continue her activism work, regardless of the scandal. The last thing she needed was for her philanthropic efforts to be overshadowed by her husband's affair. Amid the emotional turmoil, a flicker of her old resolve appeared. Sarah refused to let David's betrayal define her. If anything, it fortified her determination. If the woman in the scandal truly was a con artist, Sarah intended to expose the lies. And if the rumors were false, she would force David to explain why he had put her through this mortifying ordeal. From that point on, Sarah began her own quiet investigation. Friends in the art world, acquaintances in legal networks across Europe, she reached out to anyone who might have a lead on Layla St. James. She had no illusions that discovering the truth would fix her marriage, but at least she wouldn't be a passive spectator to her own humiliation. Little did she know her search for answers would set off the next wave of revelations, drawing her into a labyrinth of secrets deeper and more twisted than she could have ever imagined. Back at David's penthouse, tension hung in the air like a stagnant fog. Layla paced the living room, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages and calls. She ignored most, focusing instead on David, who was huddled over his laptop in a makeshift war room arrangement with his PR team via video conference. The official statements they had released weren't silencing the rumors. If anything, the chatter online seemed to grow louder, especially on niche art world forums. Jacqueline's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. "David, we have to address these allegations head-on. We found some references to Layla's possible involvement with a French collector named Jean-Louis Moreau. He's rumored to have lost a significant sum purchasing forgeries from an unknown intermediary, someone described as an attractive American woman. Some people are linking that story to Layla. We need to refute this or confirm it." "Refute it?" Layla interjected, indignation flaring in her eyes. "It's a smear campaign by a bitter ex. I've told David this already." David sighed. "Do we have any evidence that you didn't do these things?" "Layla." "Something official? Legal documents proving your innocence?" She glowered, crossing her arms. "I never faced formal charges. That's all the proof I have." Jacqueline's voice softened. "That's not enough for the court of public opinion. They want something concrete." With a heavy sigh, David ended the call, promising to regroup later. He turned to face Layla, who was hugging herself defensively. "I need the truth," he said quietly. "I'm not accusing you, but if there's any detail you left out, I need to know." Her eyes flickered. Then she told him her story. Layla claimed she had indeed worked with Jean-Louis Moreau, one of France's most influential collectors, who hired her to help him scout and acquire valuable pieces. According to Layla, Jean-Louis was arrogant and manipulative, eventually pressuring her into a toxic affair. As she tried to distance herself professionally and personally, Jean-Louis began to sabotage her reputation, planting rumors of forgery and fraud. Layla insisted she had zero involvement in any wrongdoing and fled Europe after receiving threats from Jean-Louis' associates. She'd been attempting to rebuild her life in New York, severing all ties with that dark chapter. David listened, half wanting to believe her. The story was plausible enough. Rich men had used their influence to destroy someone's reputation before. But a nagging doubt remained. Layla was still omitting details. "What about the rumors you drugged him and stole money?" David asked, referencing a particularly sensational claim circulating online. Her cheeks reddened. Utter lies. Fabricated. "I don't do drugs. I hardly even drink. I've never stolen a cent from anyone in my life. Don't you see, he's punishing me because I left him." David studied her trembling lip, the tears welling in her eyes. He wanted to comfort her, to accept her story at face value. But the stakes were too high. His empire was in jeopardy, and if Layla was hiding something, the fallout could be catastrophic. Yet the thought of losing her, the excitement she brought into his life, filled him with dread. So he decided to proceed cautiously, choosing to believe her for the moment, but resolved to do his own thorough checks. He called in favors from private investigators he had used in corporate deals. Within hours, they began scouring European legal records, court documents, and any traces of Layla's past, all while David prepared for the next wave of media scrutiny. The scandal showed no signs of abating. Then, in a surprising twist, David's phone rang with a call from none other than Jean-Louis Moreau himself. A few months prior, David had made casual acquaintance with Moreau at a Monaco charity event. Now the French collector was reaching out directly, presumably, to discuss the fiasco. With Layla fidgeting nervously nearby, David accepted the call. On speaker, Jean-Louis' accented voice flowed smoothly. "Ah, Monsieur Harrington. I see we have a common acquaintance." David cleared his throat. "Apparently so. I'd like to get to the bottom of this. You're aware of the rumors?" A condescending chuckle crackled over the speaker. "Rumors, yes. But they are not rumors, monsieur. The woman you call Layla St. James, if that's her real name, defrauded me. She introduced me to forged artwork, manipulated me emotionally, then disappeared with large commissions. I have evidence. I attempted legal action, but she slipped away." Layla blanched, shaking her head vehemently at David. David pressed. "She claims you invented these lies because she ended a personal relationship with you." A harsh laugh erupted from Jean-Louis. "Personal relationship? She seduced me for one purpose, to gain access to my network and my finances. I warn you, Harrington, this is a dangerous woman. She is skilled at deception. If you continue to involve yourself with her, your name, your empire, both will burn." The call ended abruptly. Layla broke into tears, insisting Jean-Louis was lying, that he was the manipulator. David stood there, torn. On one hand, he despised Jean-Louis's smug tone and recognized how men of power often rewrite history to blame women. On the other, the man's conviction was chilling. Could it all be true? David's private investigators would soon deliver a preliminary report, but the emotional stakes were skyrocketing. If Layla was innocent, David would stand by her. If she was guilty, he risked his fortune, his reputation, everything. And all the while, Sarah loomed in the background, her silence perhaps more threatening than any media outlet. That night, David slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of forging art and forging love, unable to discern which illusions were real. Little did he know the truth would be more complicated and more shocking than he could ever anticipate. By the following morning, David's investigators had sent a cryptic message. "We have substantial findings. Meeting recommended." He arranged for them to come to the penthouse, carefully scheduling it when Layla would be out. She had departed earlier to clear her head, though David wondered if she was actually meeting someone else. Just after noon, two stoic men in suits arrived, introducing themselves as Morgan Harris and Philip Zhao. David led them into the study, shutting the door behind them. Their expressions were grim. Morgan began. "Mr. Harrington, we've identified two separate legal dockets in Paris and Brussels that involve an American woman with a similar profile to Ms. St. James. The name used was not Layla St. James, but Linda Macpherson." Same initials, LM Philip continued. "The charges were dropped in one case and settled out of court in another. Both involved allegations of art fraud and misrepresentation. The documents list an unidentified male accomplice." David leaned forward, his pulse pounding. "Are we sure this is the same woman?" Morgan nodded. "We have a 78% facial recognition match between photos from archived news articles and the images you provided us of Ms. St. James. A strong likelihood it's her." A nauseating dread coursed through David's veins. "Any sign of Jean-Louis Moreau's involvement?" Philip replied. "He's mentioned in the Brussels docket as a complaining witness. The details were sealed, but we suspect a settlement was reached behind closed doors." David sank into his chair, his mind a kaleidoscope of betrayal and rage. He thought of confronting Layla, but a text on his phone interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Unknown number. "If you want to keep certain secrets from your wife and the public, it'll cost you $5 million. Wire instructions to follow." Accompanying the text was a single photograph, a candid shot of David and Layla in an intimate moment on the Belize beach, far more revealing than anything posted on social media. Clearly, someone had been photographing them. The angle suggested a drone or a long-range camera. And now they wanted money. David clenched his jaw. "I'm being blackmailed," he growled, showing Morgan and Philip the text. They exchanged worried looks, cautioning David not to make any hasty moves. This could be linked to Ms. St. James's alleged accomplice, Morgan offered. "We've seen this pattern before." Seething, David dismissed them. He needed a plan. A quiet hush money payment would only encourage more extortion down the line. Yet ignoring the threat could lead to even greater exposure. And the worst part was the growing suspicion that Layla herself might be part of this scheme, another elaborate con. But a flicker of doubt lingered. Perhaps Layla truly was a victim, and her old accomplice was extorting them both. He decided he needed to corner Layla that very evening. No more half-truths or evasion. He wanted her entire story. If she lied or faltered, he'd cut her off and let the legal system do its worst. But if she persuaded him of her innocence, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could face this together. Hours later, Layla returned. David wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said curtly, leading her into the study. She looked apprehensive, eyes darting to the closed door. He showed her the blackmail text and the incriminating photo. He then presented the investigative report, the name Linda Macpherson, the out-of-court settlements. With every piece of information, Layla's face paled further. When he finished, an uneasy silence settled. Layla's lips quivered. Then she began to speak, voice trembling. "I'm not Linda Macpherson. That was my sister." A new tale spilled forth, each revelation more shocking than the last. Layla insisted she had a twin sister raised separately after a messy divorce in her childhood. The sister was the one who got entangled with Jean-Louis, forging art and leveraging Layla's identity. Layla claimed she tried to help her sister out of the mess, but it spiraled beyond control. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I fled to America to escape that chaos. My sister threatened to drag me down with her. I changed my name legally to distance myself from her record. David, I swear I've never defrauded anyone. I thought you'd never understand, so I kept it hidden. David's mind reeled. The idea of a twin, a doppelganger who could have orchestrated these crimes, sounded outrageous, but not impossible. Layla sobbed, claiming her sister was the blackmailer, the one who had been snapping secret photos and demanding money. She's punishing me for leaving her behind, for not bailing her out again. The story was so elaborate, so twisted. David's gut wrenched with conflicting emotions. The puzzle pieces fit a little too well, yet Layla's tears seemed genuine. He remembered how she had always been vague about her family, how frightened she seemed whenever he asked about her past. Could this all be real? Wrestling with his doubts, David found himself making a decision based on a precarious blend of logic and emotion. If what you're saying is true, we need proof, he said, voice stern. We'll involve my investigators. We'll find your sister, and we'll end this blackmail. Layla nodded, relieved. Whatever it takes. I'll do anything. A fragile truce formed between them that night. David, driven by a potent mix of fear, pride, and infatuation, chose to believe Layla at least temporarily. He vowed to protect her from the blackmailer, from the swirling rumors, from everything. Yet in the darkness of the penthouse, as Layla slept fitfully in the next room, David stared out the window at the glowing city lights, wondering if he'd just made the greatest mistake of his life. While David grappled with the twin sister revelation, Sarah conducted her own inquiry, determined to uncover the truth about Layla St. James. Through her legal network, she managed to contact a renowned French attorney named René Fournier, who had once handled a high-profile art fraud case involving Jean-Louis Moreau. Via a series of lengthy email exchanges, Sarah pieced together a confounding puzzle. According to René, there had indeed been an American woman at the center of the Moreau scandal. Someone who used multiple aliases, among them Linda and Layla. Official documents were sealed, but rumors suggested the woman had an accomplice, possibly a family member. René also hinted that the entire fiasco nearly extended into a broader European crime syndicate. But before any formal charges could stick, the woman vanished. Moreau had enough influence to keep the scandal out of mainstream news, presumably to save face. But the rumor mill churned relentlessly behind closed doors. Sarah's instincts told her that David's mistress had some connection to that case, but she wanted concrete proof. She scrolled through obscure websites, reading half-legible Google translations of French tabloids, looking for any mention of sisters or twins. Then she stumbled on a small blog post from years ago that mentioned a sibling duo suspected of art forgery, one rumored to be involved with Moreau. The post cited no official documents, but the narrative was eerily similar to Layla's story. Frustrated, yet fueled by this partial validation, Sarah pressed further. She reached out to an old law school acquaintance in Brussels, who was now a mid-level judicial clerk. Within a day, the acquaintance confirmed that sealed records existed involving a Linda McPherson, but he couldn't access details without risking his career. He did, however, confirm the mention of a sister in the sealed complaint. Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Layla might indeed have a twin, a partner in crime, or a separate individual entirely. Either possibility spelled trouble for David, and by extension, Sarah. If Layla had roped David into a blackmail scheme, the scandal could destroy his reputation and the philanthropic work Sarah herself cherished. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in an even more unexpected way. Late one afternoon, Sarah received a cryptic text from a number labeled unknown. Meet me at the Green Leaf Cafe on 5th. I have information about Layla. Come alone. A friend. Wary of a trap. Sarah nearly ignored it, but curiosity and a desire to protect herself compelled her to go. She arrived at the cafe, a cozy, dimly lit space, scanning the patrons nervously. A tall, lean man in a baseball cap stood and waved her over. As she approached, he took off the cap, revealing salt and pepper hair. She recognized him vaguely from a magazine cover, Jean-Louis Moreau. Her heart hammered as she sat down, unsure how to proceed. Moreau spoke first, his English tinged with a delicate accent. "Mrs. Harrington, thank you for coming. I apologize for the clandestine approach, but we share a common predicament." She regarded him with cold caution. "You claim to have information about Layla St. James." His lips curled into a faint smile. "Or Linda McPherson, or whatever she calls herself these days." Sarah's breath caught. "So it's true?" Moreau leaned in. "I contacted your husband, but he seems enamored by her. Or perhaps she's convinced him of a sob story. Either way, he is not receptive. But you, Mrs. Harrington, you have more at stake if this escalates further." He slid an envelope across the table. Sarah opened it to find printed emails, photographs, documents linking Layla to a series of art deals with suspicious authenticity. One photo showed a woman identical to Layla holding hands with a second woman, a near doppelganger. Another picture captured them in front of a Belgian art gallery, rumored to deal in forgeries. The timestamps suggested these were from a few years ago. Proof of her partnership with her twin, who is equally cunning. Moreau explained. "They swindled me and they swindled others. I want them both to face justice. But your husband is in the way, blindly protecting her." Sarah felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, bitterness, heartbreak, and a strange sense of vindication. Part of her wanted to lash out at David. Part of her wanted to pity him. She also wondered what Moreau expected from her. Moreau eyed her. "I need your help. Influence your husband to break ties with her. If he continues to shield her, she will only drag him further into the mud. And I suspect her sister lurks in the shadows, planning something bigger. Perhaps the blackmail we are hearing about Sarah, swallowed hard." "What do you get out of this?" His brow furrowed. "Closure, justice, and the chance to salvage what's left of my reputation in Europe. Also a certain moral satisfaction in knowing these sisters don't dupe anyone else." They parted ways with a tense handshake. Sarah clutched the envelope as if it were a time bomb. Her marriage had been on the brink of collapse, but this new knowledge gave her a sense of responsibility. She had to warn David, if only to protect him from sinking deeper into a catastrophic scandal. She also felt a measure of compassion. Despite his betrayal, David was still the man she once loved, and no matter how furious she felt, she didn't want him ruined by these manipulations. That night she found herself driving to David's penthouse, not entirely sure how she would approach the subject. The envelope of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. She thought of all the ways this meeting could go. Would David believe her? Would Layla be there, spitting venom at Sarah's intrusion? One thing was certain, the next steps she took could determine the fate of both their futures and possibly save David from the greatest betrayal of his life. Sarah arrived at David's penthouse just after dusk, her nerves taut with urgency. The doorman let her in, without question. As she stepped off the private elevator, she found David pacing the living room phone clutched in hand. He froze when he saw her guilt, relief, and dread flashing across his face. "Sarah," he began. She raised a hand. I know everything. I'm here to stop you from making a terrible mistake. Without another word, she extended the envelope Jean-Louis Moreau had given her. David took it, flipped through its contents, photographs of Layla and her twin emails, detailing suspicious art deals and banking documents that hinted at blackmail. His face tightened with disbelief. Where did this come from? He asked quietly. From Moreau, Sarah said. He claims Layla and her sister ran a sophisticated art scam, and now she's entangled you in it. David looked stunned. Layla told me her sister set her up, that she's the victim here. She also told you she'd be honest with investigators, Sarah countered. Did she ever show you this? She pointed to a photo of Layla and her sister, exchanging a thick envelope, both smiling. Before David could reply, Layla stepped out of a side room. Her hair was tousled, her eyes burning. You're working with that man, Sarah. That manipulative monster. Sarah didn't flinch. You've been hiding too much. If you're innocent, prove it. I was trying to protect David. Layla cried. My sister threatened us both. I didn't plan to fall in love, but I did. Everything changed. Before David could react, Layla's phone buzzed. She paled, then bolted toward her bag. Her belongings spilled across the floor, lipstick's wallet and a folded note. Sarah snatched it up. Swiss wire transfer instructions, she read aloud. Is this your sister's next payment? Layla's defenses crumbled. I was going to handle it. I didn't want David dragged through this. So you'd rather pay hush money than tell the truth? Sarah's voice was tight with disgust. David stared at Layla, torn between fury and heartbreak. You told me we were into this together, but you lied again. I had to. Layla shouted, tears streaming. I knew if you doubted me, you'd walk away. David's face hardened. And now I just might. The room fell into tense silence. Then quietly, David picked up his phone. I'm calling the police, he said, dialing. Let them figure out who's lying. Layla lunged for the phone, but Sarah stepped in her way. A moment later, the call connected. The decision was made. Sirens approached in the distance. Layla collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Sarah turned away, fighting back tears of her own, of betrayal, loss, and something like pity. The truth would unravel in the days to come. Investigators would trace the blackmail, expose the twins' identity, and sort through Layla's involvement. David's public image would take a hit, but it would survive. Whether his marriage did only time would tell. But for now, the storm outside mirrored the one within, and none of their lives would ever be the same. Betrayal, scandal, and secret identities. This story proves that even the most powerful among us can be undone by hidden truths. In the end, David Harrington learned the hard way that wealth and influence can't shield you from the consequences of deception. Sarah, despite her heartbreak, found renewed strength in confronting the lies head-on rather than remaining a silent victim. As for Layla or Linda, her fate was sealed by the very illusions she spun, reminding us that the truth always finds a way to surface.